All right, hey everybody. And hopefully there's some folks watching us online or catching the recording if they couldn't make it. Super glad to have you all here this evening. Couple of things. Hopefully you know that this is not just a one-night thing. It continues tomorrow. And over dinner, we were asking Paul questions, and he was getting pretty fired up. So, looking forward to tomorrow. And then, what was the other thing? I can't remember. But we're glad that you're here. I'm going to say a word of prayer, intro Paul, and get off the stage, because you know I can talk too long sometimes. So, all right, let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for everyone here watching online. We have an opportunity today, no matter where we are in our faith journeys, whether we're seeking, whether we're trying to figure it out, whether we've been a Christian for a long time, we have an opportunity today to understand the Bible, understand what's happening in the Middle East more deeply, appreciate your story and what you've done throughout the millennia, and what it can mean for our lives today. So, Lord, I just pray all of us take this moment and this time to open our hearts and our minds to some good truth and growth that we can have in our own lives. In your name I pray. Amen. So for context, I met Paul in 2019 and Diane when I went to Israel, and they have a program through the college of bringing pastors or parishioners, so that's all of us, to Israel for 2 weeks for like a semi-academic but semi-tour experience. So it's not like you go and you can do a lot of tours, and we definitely bumped into those along our journey, but we also went to places that the tours just don't go, because I think, I could be wrong, but my perception was, unless there was an academic reason, like, you know, it wasn't the most spiritual of places to be, but it was very interesting when it came to understanding the Bible more deeply, and so I really appreciated those aspects of it. One of the things that I really took away from the experience and appreciated is we went to spaces, and there's a lot of sacred spaces in Israel, and they just did a very pragmatic job of telling us, hey, this is a place where this event that you and I know so well from the biblical story may have happened, and it may not have happened. We don't know. But then there's spaces where we may know. And it was just a really honest approach to the geography and the text and the experience and the archaeological discoveries that they were having. So I really appreciated my time there. And so last year I reached out to Paul and I said, hey, could you come do a whole thing? And he's like, well, I'm booking a year out. So that's how you know how fancy he is. I mean, honestly, do I need to say anything more about being a doctor or anything like that? Just, it takes a year to book him, okay? So if you want him to come over, plan ahead. So anyways, finally, a year later, we're here, and I'm super glad to have him and Diane making the trip over from Chicago. And so tonight we're going to be talking about archaeological discoveries in the Bible, and then tomorrow we have a lot of rich content for you as well. So that's all I'm going to say. Paul, why don't you come up and join us? Paul, everybody.
Great. See if I'm on. Great. Wow. It's good to see all of you. And whoever put the ropes up, thank you. Thank you. To bring everybody forward. My grandfather, who grew up in a church in Sweden, a Swedish Lutheran church, he said when they got into the church, the only place to sit down, the whole sanctuary was empty, except the back had the 2 pews in it. So people sat there. And when the last person sat, it tipped something, and everybody got one of these straitjacket seat belts. The thing ran on a rail to the front, clamped, the floor opened up, and another pew popped out. Right? Everything he told me was true. I always believed him. But that got everybody that got everybody up front. So the ropes do the same thing. So good to see all of you, and thank you for the introduction. We have 3 sessions tonight on archaeology, tomorrow late afternoon on geography, of the Bible, and then after dinner in the evening, same time tomorrow, something about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I would imagine that's the one that will generate most of the questions that we have, because it's the most immediate to the news today and to what we're doing today and so on. For all three of them, whether it's information about archaeology in the Bible or geography in the Bible, which is my favorite one, the geography one, or what's going on in the Middle East today, there's two things that we could do. One thing would be for me to give you just a lot of data, like the dump truck full of facts or pseudo-facts, dump it up and you get buried by them, and go home and say, wow, that's a lot of data. The other thing would be, instead of that, would be to look at an overall approach. In academia, we call it methodology, an overall way of looking at the situation or the data or the specifics, and use a few specifics to illustrate as we go, so that we, perhaps when we're looking at, hey, something fun was dug up next week and made the news, what should I think about it, right? Or how come they're fighting over that same dry piece of real estate anyway? What can I think about it as we go? Sort of how to approach, rather than here's all of the data you can swim in. So I want to do that tonight, a little bit about archaeology, tomorrow a little bit about geography, and then a little bit about some bigger questions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that might help us sort out what we might think about it as we see the news. So if you're a data dumper, bear with me, and we'll maybe look at some bigger issues instead. So archaeological discoveries in the Bible. I put this picture on because it's a fun picture, but it's really, we're not going to talk about this picture. It just looks like archaeology, doesn't it? This is remains of a city gate, walled city, and this is the gate. We would enter this way into the city. You have a bit of the wall on both sides. The city gate of a city named Gezer, Gezer is how it shows up in English. Some of you may, when you read your Bible, pronounce it Geezer, but it's Gezer. Even though it is old, it's a Gezer, all right? And it faces, up here in the hills, the city of Jerusalem. And this is a gate that was operative, that was built during the time that that city was under control of the king, the Judean house of David in Jerusalem. So it does have relevance to the Bible, but we're not going to talk about that event or this site, but it's a pretty picture to start with. Instead, I want to start with a question, and let me see if my advancer works. This is the big test. Nope. Nope. There it is. Okay, I can see it back here as well. I want to start with a definition. What is archaeology anyway? What is it anyway? And it's a long definition, and I'll say a couple things about each of the underlying terms, and then we can continue on. The excavation. All right, archaeology is the excavation. It's digging up stuff, right, out of the ground, covered by the ground, of bits. I could say bits and pieces, rather than complete things, for the most part. Of material culture. By material culture is simply artifacts that were made and used, physical objects, by people. Today, material culture would include everything from this, slide deal, to what you're wearing, to what you drive, to everything else, right? What you live in, everything else, what you kind of plate, you eat off of, and so on. Bits of material culture. Not all of it, but bits and pieces. Usually broken or charred when it's found. Of people who lived in the past. According to the Israeli Antiquities Authority, the governing body of archaeology in the modern state of Israel, the past is everything that happened before Napoleon made it to Ottoman Turkish Palestine. 1799. So anything since 1799 in Israel that you find in the ground is yours to keep. Anything older than that belongs to the state of Israel as an antiquity. Randomly preserved in the ground. King David, didn't go around and say, this is my whatever. I like it. I'm going to bury it for posterity. He didn't make time capsules. You're living in a house. There's an earthquake that comes. There's a fire that comes. There's an army that comes, or you just happen to leave, and your stuff is there, and the roof collapses, and it's charred and burned, and half of it is slid away in the storm, and half of it is looted and taken to Babylon, and the rest of it is broken, and who needs it? And it stays. And you can't predict that process. What got it there, what kept it there, and what was found when it was dug. Just random bits, basically. Random bits, in spite of Indiana Jones and going after that whatever he's going after, right? It's just random bits of stuff preserved from which we attempt. I put the word attempt in there. We try to reconstruct aspects of the past based on that. It's a witness to the past. It's a witness to the past. Archaeologists who are good at reading the material culture, and I'm using the term reading intentionally, like you would read a book, are trying to reconstruct the past from the scraps and bits of pieces that they have. What kinds of things do you try to reconstruct? Do you try to figure out? Well, situations of life, events. Who did knock this building down? Did Joshua come through here or not, to use a biblical example? What does the city of Capernaum, what did it look like in Jesus' day? Specifically, what did his house maybe look like? When he was in the room where the guy was let down through the roof on the pallet, right? To be healed because there was no space for him to come in the door. Is there something that actually excavating a home in Capernaum that dates to the time of Jesus might tell us about the social interaction between the two, or the energy that the guy had to want to go up there to be lowered down? Not an easy task in any means. Events, living spaces, economies, military activity, ethnicity. Can you tell from the remains the ethnicity of the person who lived there? I'll give you a quick answer. Almost never. But once in a while, you can have clues. Once in a while, you can have clues. Let me say why almost never. All right? You find somebody on the street wearing a necklace with a cross on it. Oh, they must be a Christian. No, it's just a nice design. Yeah? You don't know. You don't know. There are a few objects that we can find, have found, that are specific to the everyday life of a Jewish family who tried to keep the laws of Moses during the time of the New Testament. A certain way to take a ritual bath in order to enter the temple, for instance. Or a certain kind of plate to eat off of, so that it would remain pure, ritually pure, so that you could then enter into holy space and holy time. Enter into a holiday time like tonight is Yom Kippur. Day of Atonement starts at sundown tonight. Or enter into temple. These objects, if you find them, almost certainly it was a Jewish family from the time of the New Testament who was observant, who was religious, for instance. But that doesn't happen much. That is to say, most objects are not specific to ethnicity or belief, but some are. Religious beliefs, motives for doing things. We can back up a bit. I said I wasn't going to talk about this picture, but maybe I will. Let me back up a bit. Oops. Back one. There it is. To build a massive gate complex that has a thick wall coming off both sides of it, on the edge of the slope on which the city was built, and a gate complex that had 1, 2, 3, 4 different gates as you go through that you can close off to stop an enemy, says something about military activity, about offense and defense. Yeah? How many people do you put on the front line, offensive line, if you have a defensive line that's going to get your quarterback? Those kinds of questions you can ask about archaeological material. What kind of an enemy strength would be attacking this? What kind of defense do you want to have to keep them out? And as long as you've got these places where the doors are opening and closing, put rooms there so that in peacetime, this is the only entrance in and out of the city. Everybody comes and goes this way every day. So that in peacetime, this is the high rent district for a shop, for selling onions in the marketplace, or if you have a court case, no backroom, deals being made. All the elders come, all the people involved come, and they sit in the most public place in town where you cannot hide, and they hash out a solution to the crime or the wrong that was done. And everybody goes home satisfied. And the court is taken in the gate. I think Book of Ruth, where that transaction took place, in the city gate, where Boaz got Naomi and Ruth in the land, in the city gate, in order to give justice to them. So a lot of this sort of everyday life we can imagine and start to reconstruct when we put the archaeological data, what you actually find, up next to things like the Bible that has the narrative, has the story, has the events recorded in it. And what we try to do is mesh the two in ways that are most helpful. All right. Definition. Whoops. The center point. We'll talk more about this maybe tomorrow evening. The center point of the lands of the Bible. Look, you can go, Book of Esther is in modern-day Iran. Book of Romans is in modern-day Italy. There's a lot of land in between the two. But the center point, the focal point, today, Israel, Palestine. Or if you want Israel. Or if you want Palestine. That's tomorrow night's discussion, all right? Israel, Palestine. All in all is a rather poor place in terms of archaeological remains. Complicates our search. It's a poor place. When you go to Egypt, which is kind of right around the corner from them, not from us, but right around the corner from them, yeah, it's pyramids, 5,000 years old and still standing. And many other strong monuments that even though they've faced the ravages of time, are still above ground and able to be visited and looked at even before they're reconstructed. Go through Turkey, go through Greece, go through Italy, many parts of Europe, parts of Southeast Asia, parts of Central America, and lots of fun stuff still above ground that you can see and look at. Magnificent temples or palaces or religious institutions or military things or houses and all kinds of fun stuff. Rich and vibrant cultures that we can imagine from them. Come to this land, pretty flat, pretty empty, almost nothing sticking out of the ground. And what's left, even when you excavate, is almost nothing. Small little bits and scratches. That complicates it for us. Whoops, back up one. Don't read that yet. This has to communicate with there it is. The center point of the lands of the Bible, Israel, Palestine, is a rather poor place in terms of archaeological remains, yet the accumulation of data, the stuff in the dump truck I'm not going to dump on you, but the accumulation of data, the things that are being excavated constantly, is always expanding. Every year. Far more is excavated in a 2-week season at one site in ancient Israel than can be looked at and examined and figured out and published over the next 50 weeks of the year. All right? We always lag behind in getting this stuff out. Always expanding to the extent that it is far beyond the point where any one person can know and understand what's going on. So we have specialists. We have specialists. We're far beyond one authority saying, I control the data. It's too much. It's too much. I won't dump it on you. I'll give you a way of looking at perhaps some larger specifics. What also complicates, I'll put this in quotes, what also complicates things is that most people who are interested in the archaeological remains of the land of ancient Israel are so because of this book. All right? Because of if we didn't have the Bible, we wouldn't care about the archaeology of the land of ancient Israel. Of course, we'd be at a loss for a lot of other things in life as well, right? But we certainly wouldn't consider that little scrappy part of the Mediterranean desert there anything worth looking at all. The reason I say complicates it is this. This too is a witness to the past, right? It's also a textbook and guide for the present and for the future, but it's also a witness to the past. It's also a witness to the past. It's a record of events. It's a record of people's commentary about the events, like the Psalms are singing about David, right? They're not telling us about David except through song about him. The prophets, people like Isaiah and Jeremiah, are talking about their own situation and their past to help people get ready for the things that are happening to them, once in a while throwing a trajectory into the far future for us as well. But it's a record of the past and commentary on the past, the record that God wants us to know about his chosen people in a chosen place. And why it's a complicating thing is because many archaeologists in the land of ancient Israel, in Israel, Palestine, who are excavating the land of ancient Israel, are not Bible believers. They take this book and say, oh, this book is, it's not relevant. It's too much a story of religion and not enough a story about what real life was like. Something like that. And so they put it over here on the table intentionally. Maybe at best, it can give us some kind of a general feeling about what life was like. But Joshua, that's just a story people tell. All right? Now, this is not my position, all right? If it were, I think Taylor maybe wouldn't have invited me here, right? This is not my position, but it complicates the way that the data is presented, the way that we read about it in the newspaper. We have to say, now, who's actually the archaeologists, and what are they actually trying to dig up? And what are they trying to say as they're trying to understand the past? Are they trying to change this because they have a theological problem with God, so they're going to change the story by something they're trying to dig up instead? Maybe that's a new thought for some of you. It's happening a lot, actually, in the field of archaeology of ancient Israel. It's happening a lot. It means we have to be a bit careful as we go. Next slide. Bing! I'm not sure if I'm doing this or y'all are doing it upstairs. Whoops, did I do it twice? Okay, let's go to the next one. The Bible. The Bible itself. Remember I said that archaeologists digging up stuff in the ground? Every year they have new data. They're finding new things. It's an ever-expanding pile of stuff they're finding. Not here. The Bible is, the technical thing to call it is a closed corpus. That's kind of a fancy way of saying you got Genesis to Revelation. People aren't adding books to the Bible. Right? Some maybe would like to. But people aren't adding books to the Bible. It's here. It's here. Written documents from the lands and periods which the archaeologist is digging up. So it's a witness to them, speaking just like the archaeologist wants to speak about the artifacts he's finding, speaks about situations in life, events, living spaces, economies, military activity, ethnicity, religion. It's the same list that we had before. And what we want to try to do is put them together. Put them together, as we go. What's expanding about the Bible, it's not the number of books we have 66, right? Yeah. What's expanding about the Bible is ways it's being interpreted. Yeah? Ways it's being interpreted. So how can we keep our interpretation solid? How can we hold fast to biblical truth? How can we look then back at stuff that's being dug out of the ground? How can we see ways that will help us fill in, explain, enrich our understanding of the Bible, not so that we're changing our interpretations per se, but understanding, filling them out better. Filling them out better. How do we do that? How do we do that? That's a big question. Let me give you maybe some examples here. This isn't working. Where's my guy in the booth? There we are. Maybe you can swish this for me. It's not working. There it is. Okay. Here, I'm not sure. Did I do that or did you do that? I don't know. We don't know. We don't know. The Spirit moves how it will. The Spirit moves how it will. Okay. Here's an archaeological site. The technical word here is tel, T-E-L. Skip the second L. T-E-L. It's a biblical Hebrew word. It means mound, not hill. A hill is a God-made feature on the ground. A tel is a person-made feature on the ground, made up of layers of time, layers of settlement over time. Here's the deal. A guy comes along, let's say 4,000 years ago. A guy herding sheep and goats has a goat hair tent to live in, moving along with the seasons, looking for a place to live and settle down for a bit, finds a spot that has water running sometime during the year, maybe most of the year. You can tell you have that here because in the front of the picture we've got some reeds and things. The soil looks pretty good as well. And so you pitch your tent and you stay. Because the water is good, the soil is good. You can have sheep and goat life, they're pretty good. You can grow some crops and things, and you stay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, a couple hundred years you stay. You start to bury your parents here. You start to conceive and raise your kids here. They bury their parents here. And pretty soon the ground becomes sacred to you. It becomes special to you. You stay, your family gets larger, maybe a few dozen people now, maybe a couple hundred people now, extended families, you marry your first cousin, the whole deal. You realize that the soil can actually be packed into bricks and you can build permanent structures out of mud. All right? And so you do that. And then along comes something you can't control. Something you cannot control, either a significant change in climate, either an enemy coming in, either a disease happening, maybe an earthquake, something happens, and everybody's gone. And another 100 or 200 years later, the same thing happens again. Or maybe the great-grandkids come back, they remember the place where, and the name is there from their great-grandfather. And they decide to live in the same place. And what happens to a mud brick house that's collapsed? What does it turn into? A mud brick house that was there 100 years ago that collapsed turns into a pile of mud. Smashed. But this is holy ground to you. And so you build on top of it. Maybe there's a tiny corner left that you start to build off of again, and you're slightly higher than you were before, maybe only 2 inches off the ground, but slightly higher. Over a couple thousand years, this thing is going to raise in elevation. Maybe the larger situation is such that you can actually start to build in stone. Maybe there's a trader coming by and brings material culture, material goods from far down the street, or maybe across the river, or down in Egypt. And maybe you say, I don't want to marry my first cousin, and you want to marry, the daughter of the stranger who came in. And the ethnicity changes a bit, and the material culture changes a bit. And pretty soon the elevation goes up, and to get to the place you climb the slope, and then you realize, oh, there's an enemy. What can we do to fortify this place? And so you build a wall around the top. Maybe this happens 3, 4, 5 times. This is a tell. Tells went out of business. That is to say, the last settlement on top of a tell in the land of ancient Israel, other than the Romans building a temple up there 2,000 years ago, they tended to go out of business around the year 400 BC, which is still 2.5 millennia from now. Pretty far in the past, yeah? But these are wonderful things to excavate. This is the core of ancient Israel, to excavate tells. Let me see if I can change one more slide here. Nope. There it is. Here's a kind of a layer cake kind of look at it. Layers in time, you see. The higher you are, the more recent. The lower, the more ancient, typically speaking. As you go, there's other diagrams on here, but you can see that sort of the challenge of the archaeologist is to come into there, start to identify these layers of time, these material cultures, start to gather enough material from each one to recreate the living spaces, to say something about the situations in life and the ethnicity, and does it match the Bible or not? These kinds of questions. Next slide. Maybe it's just easiest for me to say next, and I'll leave this alone. This is an example. This is a place that maybe some of you have heard of, Megiddo. Many people identify it with Armageddon in Revelation 16. You can see here the tell used to be up here. And when the teams, mostly from the University of Chicago, came here in the 1920s and 30s, they found 25 layers. 25 layers of time, down onto a cultic site, which now has been removed. They're going even deeper as we speak. The Jezreel Valley beyond, some call it the Valley of Armageddon beyond, a massively significant site with layers of time throughout the entire time of the Old Testament. Next slide. I'll just leave this down. This is what you look for. You see the soil here is a little different color than down here and up here. You see that? Easy to see, yeah? What color would you say this is, this middle layer? Gray. Ashen. Ashen. This is what we call a burn layer. A burn layer. This is what the archaeologist wants to find. All right? They want to find remains of a floor. It can either be pebble or stone or simply earth packed. Heavy earth packed. They want to find remains of a floor. On top of the floor, they want to find pottery, vessels that people used to eat off of or cook with or store things in. Pottery does not burn in fire. It actually gets harder. It bakes. And so it's going to withstand, the fire of the earthquake or the enemy or the what have you. All right? Most other things are going to burn up. Metal will remain as well, but mostly it's pottery. You want to find it on the floor, everything collapsed down on top of it. All right? Everything collapsed down on top of it, sealed. That is to say, nobody disturbed it. So when you excavate and you pick up the roofing material and everything that fell in, you find the objects still on the floor. Now, they're going to be smashed, probably, but all the pieces, hopefully, are there. And you can start to reconstruct life that way. Sealed contexts is what you want to find, and you can find some pottery here. You see that? This is a whole vessel. It's smashed, but all the pieces are there. All right, that's going to be significant. Let's look at the next one. Maybe, I don't wear earrings in real life either, but I have to have this one on here, okay? So this is maybe a good example. Then we'll ask a question, all right? This is a good example. So we come to a site. This is a place just south of Jerusalem, exactly halfway between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And those are two towns that you maybe know from Bible reading and otherwise. Jerusalem to Bethlehem is a 5-mile walk. Not very much. 5-mile walk, you do it in an hour and a half. From downtown Jerusalem to downtown ancient Jerusalem to Bethlehem, exactly halfway between is this place. On a bit of a higher rise on the main route, between the two, on a higher rise with a good view down. So you go up there and you find, sticking out of the ground, stones. You see them here? You can see them? Quite a few of them. If you can't see them, what the archaeologist does is he waits until the dry season, early spring, late spring rather, lights a match, all the grass burns off. Now you can see them. All right? Now you can see it. And so you've got these stones, and you see that this is not a natural shape. This has been hand-hewn, correct? This one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. And they don't occur here naturally. They're laid on a course as a wall. And if you kind of burn it off and see the entire whatever's exposed up there, you see that the building blocks are larger than a person would have in a common house. They make a wall longer and a living space bigger than what would be in a common house. And you say, we must have something important. Maybe it's a palace. Maybe it's a temple. Maybe it's a something. Maybe it's a marketplace. I don't know. And so you say, let's dig. And so you go to the bottom where the ground starts, and you realize this isn't ground. This isn't ground. This is plaster, actually. It's not ground. It's covered over it maybe to look. Scrape it away, plaster, and you then drop a square into the ground. You drop a square, usually 5 by 5 meters, so pretty big, and you go straight down. And you realize, you see how thick the plaster is? Here it is. Can you see it? And underneath is a layer of soil, light, and then darker. And the darker soil is right on top of, this is bedrock. This is the ground, bedrock. And on top of the bedrock, you find more stones like these. You see this way, and this way, and this way. And over here is the extension of this one. And you say, what do we have here? We've got 2 phases of what looks like a pretty important building that was destroyed and rebuilt right on top of it. Maybe a little larger, but the same style, you might say. Right on bedrock. Here it is. When it's destroyed, this is the soil that was attached with it. You bring in soil fill to level it out. You lay plaster, you build again. Make sense? Okay, so this is what you're looking for, these sealed contexts. These sealed contexts. The question is, what is the place? And let me jump to a quick ending without dumping the data on you. The quick ending is the king of Jerusalem, the kings of Jerusalem, of the house of David. Kings like Hezekiah the king, or Ahaz the king, or Jehoiakim the king. These are maybe not the most famous names, but they're the kings toward the end of the kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem was getting too crowded, too hot in the summertime. It's actually a city built, the old part of the city, hidden down in a valley. Not a nice place to kind of sit and try to govern from. And so let's build another palace up on the higher hill that catches the breezes of the air in the summertime, and that I can actually see my kingdom and control the main route, blah, blah, blah. And this seems to be that palace. Seems to be that palace. All right? That helps. The prophet Jeremiah talks about this palace, actually, and criticizes the kings for living in luxury when the poor people in the city are squalid living conditions and hardly able to make a living and being oppressed by unjust economic systems. And the king is living in, well, to you it looks like a bunch of ruins, but you have to, bring it up. Massive compound on a wonderful spot, and so on. And this helps us kind of reconstruct the tensions that were happening in the kingdom of Judah in its waning years as the Judeans were tending to go after other gods, and the Babylonians came in and judged them and destroyed the city as a result. Let's do one more and see where we are. Cutting the bulk, making the wall as you cut into the square smooth so that it's possible to see the layers in time. Does that look like a fun way to spend your summer? Next slide is a little easier, all right? This next slide, nowadays archaeologists know that people want shade. All the digging is in the summertime. That's when university is out, and that's the hottest time of the year as well. So it's pretty tough, but working here, this is at Bethsaida, one of the towns of the Gospels by the Sea of Galilee. One more picture, and we can ask a question. Whoops. Let's skip this one. For the interest of time, let's go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Here. All right? Let's do it here. All right. The question is this, and then I'll explain what the picture is. The question is this: is archaeology, this digging and finding remains, is it more of a scientific methodology, very exact, or is it more of an art? Is it more a skill set where we kind of finesse the edges a bit? What we're looking at here, and this is a fuzzy picture, it's not a digital picture, it's an old slide picture, so it's a bit fuzzy when it's up here, is, according to the sign, what? Holy of Holies. Holy of Holies. Woo! Not the one in the temple in Jerusalem. But the word is the same, Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies is this this niche you see here, this kind of square niche. The rest of the temple is out here. All right? It's a temple. The rest of the temple is out here. And you see there are stairs where you can ascend into the Holy of Holies. Are you with me? Stairs ascending in. And here on the left is it's about this high, a square limestone structure, pillar, that has an indentation on the top, and here's a smaller one. And both of those, in that indentation, was found burned scarring. This was a place of incense offerings. This is an altar of incense offering spot. Burned scarrings like you would have if you would light a fire on any kind of a stone or something and then blow it out and it's discolored the stone, yeah? So there's burning that went on there. And then further in, two standing stones, undecorated. If you decorate it, what do you have? You've got an idol. Two standing stones undecorated. All right? Now, the fellow standing here, and this is why I have to give you a quote that he's kind of famous for. of late. Anson Rainey, he passed away in 2011, so it's kind of an old picture here. He was an archaeologist. He was a Bible scholar. He was a language expert. So who needs the English? Let's do the Hebrew and the Greek, right? He was a language expert. He was an historian. And he was a geographer. That about covers it, right? And was able to look at wide amounts of data and say, okay, what can we say when we pull it all together? And he said this. He said his definition of archaeology is this. Archaeology is the science, the technical part, of digging a square hole and the art of spinning a yarn about what you find inside. All right? Now, the first time I heard him say that, he got it, he either did it intentionally or he got it mixed up, and he said this: archaeology is the art of digging a square hole and the science of spinning a yarn about what you find inside. And I like that one even better, because in fact it's both. Archaeology is a discipline that is highly scientifically refined these days. Things under the microscope, they're able to look at a piece of pottery that used to be a full vessel, look at the pores in the ceramic, in the clay, the pores, find the molecular remains of the product that used to be in the pot 3,000 years ago. All right? They're able to look at a piece of clay that we used as an impression, as a seal on a rope that was tied around a sack, and not just read the name of the guy whose name is on the seal, but look at the impression of the fibers of the rope in the back of the seal and tell you what kind of plant the rope was made out of 3,000 years ago. Under the microscope, they're able to look at the pores of the clay and tell you where the clay came from. What part of the country, because not all clays are equal. All right? Just as an example of the science of archaeology. And then the art of spinning a yarn about what you already have. So here it is. What's an archaeological scientific fact in this picture? You have a step, and above it you have another row of stones slightly indented from it. And above that, you have another set of stones slightly indented into it with a columned stone squared off, burned on top. This is science, this is fact. That it is an incense altar in a temple is interpretation. Now, it happens to be a pretty good interpretation, but it still falls in that category. But let me show you where this can go as an example. By the way, this is at a place called Arad in the southern part of the country, east of where Abraham hung out all the time. He hung out in Beersheba and some other places. This is east of that, toward the southern end of the Dead Sea. But it dates to the time of the Israelite monarchy, Solomon through King Josiah, the entire time of the Old Testament monarchy. This is when this dates to, this temple. Here's where the interpretation can go, all right? In the temple in Jerusalem, the real one, that we haven't found archaeologically. But in the temple in Jerusalem, you have, as you get to the Holy of Holies, an incense altar, one. And behind the incense altar, in the Holy of Holies, you have the Ark of the Covenant, one. And the Ark of the Covenant is an object. You can read about what it looks like in the book of Exodus, but it's an object that represents the presence of God, coming to live and dwell imminently, face to face, with people and with the high priest, the presence of God in a very special spot in the Holy of Holies. All right? What's the problem with this Holy of Holies? How many incense altars do you have? how many places where the Ark of the Covenant would be, but here it's represented as a unidled, undecorated standing stone. How many do you have? How many deities are worshipped here? How many deities are worshipped here? You see, and this is now the art of spinning a yarn of what you find inside. You get it? This is a temple, the Holy of Holies in a temple, in a rod, a temple that was part of a fort of Judean soldiers sent down under the sponsorship of the king of Judah. It's official. It's an official spot under the sanction of what's going on in Jerusalem. And you got two. So what are you going to do, oh archaeologist or oh Bible reader, when you find data, you see, and need to spin a yarn about it? What do you do? As an example. Let me give you some examples of what people have done, all right? Oh, this book, don't believe it. This is what we found. This is science. We don't need to believe this book. All right? Some people choose to stand there. What's another thing we can do? This is a holy book to us. It's the Word of God. Let's see if we can't sense why this might have happened. All right? Huh. You know, when you read Bible carefully, the book of 2 Kings in particular, there's long discussion in the book of 2 Kings when the northern kingdom of Israel falls and when the southern kingdom of Judah falls to the Assyrians and to the Babylonians. You get the event, what happened, but then you get, let's editorial insert. Why did it happen? And the reason given is, O you priests, O you kings, O you people have turned your back on the word of God through Moses, and you have gone after other ways. The line is, under the deities on every high hill, under every green tree. The nature deities of the Canaanites, plural. And you've brought them in. In fact, 2 Kings even talks about people in the temple in Jerusalem worshiping more than one deity. And the prophets say, Babylon is coming to destroy it all. You've gone too far away. And it seems to be that there might be evidence of that here as well. All right? Seems to be. This becomes the guide. This becomes the guide. This becomes the guide. This one. This one. Let me give you a third option. Yes, one God. Yes, this is a temple to one God. But because you have two standing stones, and actually the one they found, this is the replication, the one they found is in the museum in Israel, in Jerusalem. A big one and a small one, a big one and a small one. So it's two aspects of who God is. Now what we tend to do when we define God in our own minds, we tend to create God based on things that we know. We tend to make him into an old guy with a big beard. We tend to make him into somebody who's very kind all the time and never says no. You tend to make him into, all kinds of things. We do the same thing with Jesus, by the way. When I was growing up and going to my Methodist church down the road in rural Illinois, Jesus wore a suit and had a thin tie and a short haircut, and voted Republican and blah, 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 right? And so on, and so on, and so on. Not to pick on anything, but there it is. We tend to create, and by doing that, if we create God in our image, if we create Jesus in our image, it means I'm okay as I am. Doesn't matter. He's on my side. I don't have to change, you see. Maybe what's happening here is the same thing. Some have said the big altar, that's the He-Man part of who God is, when he has to be tough. And the little altar, this is the kinder and gentler God, when you need to snuggle up a little bit, right? And things are going bad. And so depending on what your situation in life is, you either go there or there. Same deity. There's a third interpretation about what this might be. The answer is, we don't know. But you can kind of get all of them, can't you? You can kind of get all of them. You can kind of get all of it as you go. Archaeology is discovering what the Bible says, more of an art or a science as well. It's a little bit of both, isn't it? A little bit of both. A little bit of sensitivity to what the Spirit says. Now, let me give you some specific examples beyond this. Next slide. Some more specific example. Let's skip this one and go to the next one. This one. Okay. Some examples of some things that archaeologists have been finding in this poor country of archaeological remains. Some things are quite nice, actually. Some things are quite fun. And some things really do help us understand what these guys were thinking. This life of ancient Israel that we're trying to understand so that we can understand Bible better, so we can understand motive better, so we can understand ourselves better, and so on. One thing that's found is what we can call monumental architecture. Doesn't that sound fun? The U.S. Capitol is monumental architecture. Buckingham Palace is monumental architecture. My house is not. You get the difference? Okay. So monumental architecture, architectural pieces. And what we find here, and this is in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, the main national museum. I'm talking about this stone and this stone. This one and this one. You see the design here? It has this kind of circle coming out to the left and a circle coming out to the right. Can you see it on the diagram? And this little triangle on top. Can you see that? This is meant to represent, as far as we know, again, it's telling a yarn about it, but it seems to be representing a palm tree. If you look at the top of the palm tree, the leaves start out like this, and then they fold over like this, like so. But you can't do all of that in stone, so they make them curl around. Otherwise, the stone will be too thin. The book of 1 Kings describes, for instance, what the architecture and decoration of the temple in Jerusalem was like. And among other things, it says, in stone, decorated as a forest that had palm trees in it. All right? These were not found, though, as part of a temple. They were found as part of a palace. In other words, you take this top of the palm tree, put it as the top of a pillar. And what you've done is you've taken then the tree and brought it inside and made it part of your house in a permanent way. The palm tree in ancient Israel was a symbol of fertility and strength. The palm tree is a tree with a very strong and straight trunk, at least the ones that grow there. Very strong and straight. Grows usually in soil that is, or can flourish in soil that is otherwise too poor for any other kind of tree or vegetation, sandy or salty soil, and loves the heat and the sunshine, and provides wonderful oasis shade, otherwise in the middle of the desert. So it became a symbol of virility and fruitfulness and pleasant blessing. This is the palm tree. And so you put it in the temple, you put it in the palace in stone to keep it there permanently. All right? It dates, several of these have been found. Dating, here, 10th to 7th centuries, that means the entire time of the kingdom of ancient Judah, the entire time of the kingdom of ancient Israel, from David to the Babylonian conquest, essentially the Old Testament period. We find these being used the entire time, and we find them in the large, let's say, urban, official, governmental cities. In particular, we find them in the capital of Judah, Jerusalem. We find them in the capital of Israel, Samaria. And you can say, oh, well, good. Those are, twin kingdoms, right? These are both kingdoms of ancient Israelites. These are both kingdoms that have Torah. These are kingdoms that share a culture. These are kingdoms that, even though they fight amongst each other, are really brothers at heart. Why not? But we also found one in the capital of the Ammonites, a place called Rabbah, which today is the city of Amman, the capital of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, east of the Jordan River. The Ammonites also had them in their capital city. Say, oh, now wait a minute. The data that the Bible is giving us, the storyline the Bible is giving us, the narrative the Bible is giving us about the events of Judah and Ammon are fighting. David fights the Ammonites. Later, kings fight the Ammonites. The Ammonites join the Philistines to do a pincer movement to try to destroy Jerusalem. Almost always when the Ammonites show up in the Bible, it's conflict. It's conflict over the resources and so on. Almost always fighting. All right? When the prophets talk about the Ammonites, people like Jeremiah and Isaiah, it's God is going to judge you for fighting us all the time. Not good stuff, is it? And all of a sudden you find the same architectural monumental fragments in both cities. All of a sudden you and the enemy have the same. It's like Washington. This would be an example. When the designers of the U.S. Capitol building wanted to put a dome on it, this is in, the 19th century, right? Rather than go to ancient Rome for an example, you go to Red Square instead and get one that looks like this. And we'd say, wait, what's going on? That's our heritage? Maybe for some people it is. But what is that saying in terms of a royal symbol? How come the Ammonites and the Judeans, these enemies, have the same architecture? In fact, it's not just the stone in the column. The walls which they're connected to, we also have found. And the style of building a wall, with the size of the stone and the organization of the stone identical in both places. It's like they had the same architect. All right, that's a fact on the ground, an archaeological fact on the ground. They're building the same palace. How come they're fighting all the time in the Bible? You'd expect them to be the best of friends, wouldn't you, for that to happen? So what do you do? What does that mean? What does that mean? And in this case, I would say maybe what we need to do is you don't change what the Bible says. As some people want to. You don't change what the Bible says. What you do is maybe let's read it more carefully given this. Let's read it more carefully. Wait, once in a while we read in the Old Testament that there are Ammonites living in Jerusalem. Look, the cities are within sight of each other. They're not that far apart. There's a big valley in between, but you're standing on the Mount of Olives, you see the towers in Amman today. They're not that far apart. It's about a day and a half journey between the two. You're speaking languages that are quite similar to each other, like cousin languages, all right? Mutually intelligible languages. There's going to be trade connection. There's going to be economic marketing on both sides. There's going to be intermarriage on both sides. These guys are woven together on every level. Once in a while, it erupts into fighting. Let me give you a modern example. It'll help you get ready for tomorrow night, Israel-Palestine conflict. All right? When we read the news about what's going on with Israel in relation to Palestinians and vice versa, what kind of news is it usually? It's bad news, isn't it? It's usually bad news. Because they're fighting all the time, right? This is what makes news. This is what makes stories. Where does the electricity come from? When you're in Gaza and want to turn on a light switch, where does that power come from? It comes from Israel. When you go to the bank in Gaza and want to withdraw money today, what kind of money are you given? What does the actual banknote look like, the money in your pocket? What money is it? It's Israeli shekels. It's Israeli money. All right? When you want to build when the government of Israel says, let's build settlements for Jews on the West Bank next to the Arab town. Right? That happens all the time, right? Who actually is there pouring the concrete? Who owns the concrete company? Who pours the concrete? Who's there actually building the buildings so the Israeli Jews can move in? Palestinians. This doesn't make news. What it is cooperation for economic benefit or not on one level just to make life work, which happens to have ideological, for lots of reasons that we can talk about tomorrow, ideological and identity claims that are opposite of each other that you go on to fight about, all right? But on one level, you're just getting along. And this is evidence of the same thing. Evidence of the same thing. Ammon, after all, was a son of Lot. Lot was a nephew of Abraham. All right? The fight's in the family. The fight's in the family. All right? The archaeological fact is the capital. Tell a story about it. But make sure you tell a story about it in a way that's consistent with that data and this message. And this message. Let's do another one. Next slide. I have enough of these to keep us here till 10 o'clock. I've got 20 minutes. We'll stop when the time is up, all right? Here's another one. What we have here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here, these are pieces of clay. They're this big. All right? They're this big, about the size of a nickel, or maybe a quarter in size. Pieces of clay, pieces of originally blob of wet clay. And if you were writing a letter, if you were a scribe, okay? First of all, literacy is very, very low. Maybe 1% of the people can read and write in ancient Israel. Maybe that many. It's going to be very low. So you have a business transaction. Maybe you want to rent some sheep from your neighbor. Maybe you want to buy a plot of land. Maybe you want to use the plot of land for your crop this year. Maybe you've taken a shine to your neighbor's daughter for your son. And even though they're both 6 years old, they're going to get married someday. And you want to make all of this formal. So you write it down and go to a scribe and they write it down, and they're a formula for contracts, quite sophisticated, and you write it down. And then maybe it's an agreement between kings about national trade. Could be anything. You write it down on the parchment, either the leather of a sheep or a goat, perhaps, or some kind of like a papyrus, a piece of papyrus or something, and you write it down, and then you roll it up, tie it with a string, And on the string, you take a piece of wet clay and you put it right there on the knot. And you squish it down with your signet ring, where your name and your title are written backwards, so you push it in the clay so you can read it correctly. You get the idea? Or if it's not your signet ring, it's the signet ring of an official who is witnessing the event for you. All right? And then you have it either in your house. If it's a very official document, you put it in the archives of the palace or the tax office or the bank or whatever the equivalent building might happen to be. And you stack it up there, and then, in this case, Nebuchadnezzar comes, king of Babylon, sends his armies, and you destroy the Babylonian king. You want to destroy the monumental architecture. You want to take down the temple. You want to take down the palace. You want to take down the government archives. You want to go to the jugular of the functioning of the nation. Leave just the poor in the land. And these buildings are burned extensively. And what happens to the document? All evidence of your economic transaction for gain is gone. What happens to the string that was tied around it? Gone. What happens to the lump of clay? It's baked. It's baked and preserved. And when the archaeologist then is digging in Jerusalem, right on the slope of the city, opposite where the Nebuchadnezzar army was coming in, the eastern slope, just in the shadow of the temple and the palace, finds a room full of the remains of these, this one broke a little bit, seal impressions. The word is bulla, B-U-L-L-A-E, bulla. Sounds like a college football cheer, all right? Bulla, all right? They are written witness. Written witness. This is a written document, even though it's only a name. It's a written document of a real person. A real person who had authority in the administrative complex of Jerusalem at the time of the Babylonian conquest. A real person. Now, we have hundreds of these that we have found. Some of them have just the name. Some have name plus name of the father. Some have name of the father, and job of the person. And you can start then to group them, and maybe you have one of the name and name of the father, and you have the father's and his father's name. And you can, with occupation. And you can start to put together family lineage from these, or family trade from these, jobs that these people had from these, for instance. Sometimes you have one with fingerprint on it. That's a personal one. You've got the fingerprint of a Judean who lived 2,500 years ago. You've got his fingerprint, right? You just scrape off the DNA and see what you can do, right? I mean, these things become extremely personal. You're touching somebody. And this particular one here, here's a drawing of it. You read it this way. It says, belonging to, in other words, the document fell under the responsibility of Gemaryahu, son of Shaphan. Now, I bet you've never heard of those names before, but if you've read your Bible, you know these names. You know these names. Our English Bibles don't say Gemaryahu, that says Gemariah instead. And so what I want to do is look at Jeremiah chapter 36. Jeremiah chapter 36. All right? Jeremiah chapter 36 is a story that the prophet Jeremiah tells when the Babylonians are at the gates of the city, or nearly at the gates of the city, ready to destroy the city of Jerusalem, to end the Judean monarchical line, to take people captive in exile back to Babylon, to destroy much of the rest of the country, its infrastructure, its viability, its identity, erase it. And they're at the gates. They're ready to do this. And Jeremiah, the prophet of God, is going into the king and saying to the king, this is because you have allowed the kingdom basically to go the way of the world, to go the way of the nations who are here before you, to act like any other nation and group of people, to have, 2 deities you're worshiping instead of one, as an example. And what Jeremiah does is he writes, Jeremiah is literate, he's part of the 1%. He's writing God's words to him to give to the king, writing them on a parchment. And it's the winter time, and the king of Judah gets so angry with what Jeremiah is saying. What, you dare challenge me, the king? That every time Jeremiah finishes reading a section of the scroll, the king takes his knife, cuts it off, and throws it into the fire. This is what I think of you and your God. Right? Where did that happen? Where did that happen? It happened, we read, actually it was Jeremiah's scribe Baruch who was doing the reading of Jeremiah's words. Verse 10, Baruch was reading to the king from the book of the words of Jeremiah in the house of the Lord, in the temple, in a room in the temple that belonged to Gemariah, son of Shaphan the scribe. In the upper court, by the entry of the new gate, in the Lord's house, to all the people. A very detailed description of a particular spot within the temple where the king dared take the autographed copy, original copy of the book of Jeremiah and throw it in the fire because he didn't like what it said. And that happened in the room where this guy had his authority hung out. Okay. The story is powerful enough. We don't need to find the bulla of Gemariah, son of Shaphan the scribe, whose room this happened in, to get the import, the energy of the story. We don't need it. But when we can find the name of a person this obscure in the Bible, obscure. Yeah, he was important then, right? This obscure in the Bible, when you can find his name on a piece of clay that he himself touched and put his fist into, to put his name on, to guard and say, I have the authority over whatever this document is, all of a sudden the story has a reality that it maybe didn't have before. This is not Middle Earth. This is not Narnia. This is not La La Land. This is not a story that somebody made up because he felt like making up a story. The fact that we have this name verified of a person that who's ever heard of anymore on a piece of clay that he actually touched tells us that this Jeremiah's message can be believed. That what he has to say can be believed. That God's message to Jeremiah can be believed. It rings true because of this piece of clay. Right? You can't say it was made up. Someone didn't make this up and plant it. This is a real piece of evidence. This is an archaeological fact. Yeah? That meshes with the text. And that's important as we try to wrap our hands around, our heads around, or our minds, ideas, our hearts around Is this book really true? Well, here's a bit of evidence that attests to a story that otherwise seems rather fantastic. But there it is. More than that, and then I've got 4 minutes left, and maybe some of you have questions, I don't know. More than that. All right? Wouldn't it be great if in 2,600 years from now, that was him to us, 2,600 years from now, somebody finds evidence that you existed? Can you imagine? Right? Wow. So many people are on this planet faceless and nameless and known in their little circle, and in 2 generations, 3 generations, totally forgotten. And what's there? You see. This guy may be famous because we have his bulla. Guess what? The Apostle John, in the book of Revelation, the Apostle John, in the book of Revelation, says that everybody who believes in Jesus has their name, what? Inscribed, written, their name. I'll say your name, all right? I won't make it impersonal. Your name inscribed, not on a piece of clay. Your name inscribed in the book of life. In the book of life. That's more important than this. Yeah? As important as this is, to give veracity to the text, to have our name on the book of life is even more so. Even more so. And you can have that. So, all right, it's already been an hour and a half. We did a little bit of big picture. What can archaeology do? Is it how much technical? A lot. How much interpretive? A lot. But I always want to make sure that when the subject is archaeology of the Bible, that we start with Bible. That's the document that we have that we're trying to understand and make sense out of and hold near and dear. And to the extent that we can, archaeology then becomes a tool or a witness, sometimes to specific events, like this guy. Sometimes just to general living conditions. Yeah, like the Bedouin who had the tent and put up a house and started the tell. Yeah. But becomes then a discipline that allows us to understand and comprehend the way that God, in a very physical, material, experiential way, chose to interact with people then and continues to now. Continues to now. So, all right. There's more that we could do, but we'll leave it there. That's maybe enough for one go around. Questions or comments? Yes, yes.
You talked a little bit about archaeology, and I just kind of, what's the motivation of an archaeologist? I wrote a couple things, curiosity.
I feel like the price is right. Come on down.
Oh, okay. Talk to me about the motivation of an archaeologist. I mean, they're out there, they're digging, hot, it's dirty. I assume they're getting paid. I assume the archaeologist is Christian. Are they Muslim? I just wrote down things. Is it curiosity, affirmation of what we know? Is it determining what the truth? Or can you speak to that a little bit?
I'll try to do it briefly. That's a massively large and complex question that you're asking. All right. And it's all of the above, depending on who the archaeologist is. When archaeology began as a thing, and it's really relatively new, 100 and like a century and a half, It's not that old as a thing. When it began in the land of ancient Israel, it was because people were interested in this book and looking to uncover remains of the past that helped us understand the book. Some would say in order to prove the Bible. I don't think you need to prove the Bible. I think it's there, right? Some to illustrate it, some to whatever. But Bible people, seminaries, and Bible professors basically paid the bill. The excavations were funded by seminaries and other schools, even the University of Chicago. The Oriental Institute was very much connected 100 years ago, still already very much connected with the world of the broad-based Judeo-Christian underpinnings of America and the need to have the Bible understood in the church. All right, it's no longer there, but it was at one time. Yale was the same way. Harvard was the same way early on, and so funded that way, and the interest was there. When the modern state of Israel was founded in 1948, the earliest Israeli archaeologists at that point as well, even though they're Jewish, not Christian, very interested in recovering, rediscovering, and opening up the Jewish past in the land. In other words, let's find our roots here. And the Bible, the earliest document that reveals them, and let's see if we can't now find archaeological corroboration or equal weight and balance. And so you dig sites that are important in Bible stories. And the old adage is you dig with a spade in one hand and the Bible in the other hand. Right? In that case, funded by Israeli universities and partly by the state of Israel. But it was to help find their national identity, which is grounded in the experience of ancient Israel in the land as it's described in the Bible. So Bible very connected with it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
The first question is there any funding after Jesus? Are they doing it?
Now, yes. Now, what's happened in the last, let's say, last half century, especially, is that archaeology has gone beyond, well beyond, wanting to do it because of the Bible. Let's set the Bible, and I suggested this early on. Some people want to put the Bible here and say, what story does archaeology tell otherwise? In other words, maybe personally I don't believe this book. Maybe personally I don't like this book. Maybe personally I will say this book is late and agendicized propagandistic religious literature. And a lot of people say that, all right? So I'm going to leave it there. It's not going to help me. I want to see what the land is going to reveal of itself. I want to dig of itself. I want to make my reconstruction of the lives of the people who lived here, Israel being one of them, Canaanites, Moabites, Ammonites, Greece, Rome, everybody else. I want to understand how they came to be and saw themselves through the eyes of their material culture, not what some guy said about it later. Okay, so they would have a very different, if I were that, I would have done this very differently, right, tonight. We wouldn't have really looked at this at all, and we would look at other kinds of sets of data, not the Bible corroboration kind. And there it's like any other discipline. Why is somebody interested in Shakespeare? Why is somebody interested in plumbing? Why is somebody interested in high tech? Yeah, you're interested in it. This is what you like. This is what you like. And so the funding comes from now major donors who may or may not be connected to an institution. Some are independently wealthy people, and they want to leave a legacy. You know, so Bill Gates does this and that. Maybe somebody else says, I want to fund a dig. You see, and the funding is there. So a lot of archaeologists' work today is fundraising and publishing, actually. As a result, and what comes out, what comes out. Now, the newspaper, the media, for better or worse, right? The media? Yeah. They know good and well that much of the readership out there is still Christian in one form or another, or at least Christian heritage, or at least has some kind of Bible literacy. And they know good and well that if they can then promote in the New York Times or whatever what's been found in Israel that has a reference to Bible, they'll sell newspapers. As opposed to something that was found in Burma that produced Buddha. They'll never talk about that in the New York Times. Or just something else that was found. Because they know readership is still on the ground interested in this book, for better or worse. Yeah. But how they'll talk about it depends on who the author is. Maybe they'll kind of shave the message a little bit because it doesn't suit them as they talk about the find. Or not. Which is why I want you to be aware of the issue as you read. A lot of what is presented in the media about archaeology is interpretation of interpretation of interpretation. But maybe that shouldn't surprise us. The same thing happens in politics. Yeah.
I got one question here, and
yes, please.
If more people want to stick around, you can, but I know some people may want to start home. So, okay, Joe, it's a good one.
Can you go back to the pillar image?
The one with the Holy of Holies?
No.
Oh, no, just this one.
Yeah.
No, this one.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is how, okay, do you, as like an archaeological perspective, ever look at the astrological science in the sky comparative to being able to date something? Because what it looks like to me is like a ram's horn, and during, I guess, the age of Aries, which would be prior to maybe like 4,000 years ago to 2,000.
Right.
So if I were a builder,
right,
and I didn't have a god, and I had a family of builders, and I had just built pillars,
right,
how would I tell someone that this is mine and what time I did it? So what I could do is I could build that pillar as a ram's head to say, hey, this is the time that I did it. I'm just saying, like, is there other things that you've noticed that are astrological to time date something?
Okay, first of all, if the question, if an underlying question is, how do you date it to the right time
I understand
period?
there's like carbon dating to find like things to next to it, but you can't date rock.
No, you can't date rock. If the question is dating, what you do then, the archaeologist's primary tool of putting a date on a set of material remains is the style of pottery found with it. And I didn't get into that today, but it's the style and the shape of the pottery can date the pot to within sometimes a few decades. Certainly within half a century, sometimes a century depending on where you are. And if objects, non-pottery, are found in that same sealed context, then you date them at the same time period. All right? Sometimes you use carbon-14, but that's only to corroborate if the pottery maybe is a bit ambiguous as you go, or to maybe start and then kind of hone it in from there. You can't date rock, no. So these were found in strata in association with pots that we know date to, and the pottery changed. 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th century, the pottery changed. But we find these in association with all of them. That is to say, in sealed contexts of destruction layers at any one of these time periods. All right?
And that would have been the age of Aries.
Well, that would have been 10th to 7th century. Now, why the palm tree as opposed to a ram's horn? You can argue a ram's horn. It's okay. But because of the language that we have, partly in the Bible, about palm trees being carved on stone in the temple, and partly because of parallels that we have, both in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. In Babylon and in Egypt, from the same general time period, we actually have there more graphically made in terms of better art of the same kind of let's say, palm tree representations, either carved or depicted in paint inside of temples and things like that. And what that does is it kind of bends the weight of the interpretation that direction. All right? Now, having said that, no question that people in the ancient world, including the ancient Israelites, were interested in astral phenomenon. No question about it. And recognized that there were patterns in the movements of the stars and the planets and the sun. They recognized that there were constellations and that the phases of the moon and the sequence of the seasons and so on. All of this can be patterned out over time. No question about it. And the ancient world then typically either deified them or saw them as reflections of the gods and goddesses, astral deities and so on. No question about it. And then would represent that as well in certain forms. The question is, how much of that do you have in ancient Israel? That's the question. How much of that do you have in ancient Israel? And I would say, I can't give you a dump truck full of data on that. I can't. But we do have evidence that it was known, and that the prophets criticized it. That we do have. How much, where it shows up, I can't tell you.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, Paul, so much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but where they found that bulla, if I remember from 5 years ago, right next to it in the temple was a toilet.
Yes.
That's
the
right.
palace. That was a house.
It's a
toilet
house.
seat. A toilet
and
seat.
there's a toilet, yeah.
Which archaeologists love because the earth underneath the hole in the toilet seat can tell you what kind of parasites the people had.
Yeah. So just mind you,
That's
like
the
he
science.
didn't tell you that part, but when you're standing there and they're walking you through and you're looking at the site and then they're like, and then there's a toilet and you're like so moved of like, oh my gosh, it's right here in Jeremiah, and they're like, and then parasites, and you're like, yeah. But I just always took away from those moments as those are also, they're real